Welcome to a podcast episode on how do you become a digital company and compete in the age of digital, data, and AI. Now, every large company, in fact, is under pressure to fundamentally relook their business model and operating models to compete and stay relevant in the age of digital, data, and AI. The emergence of digital-first companies that scale and learn in rapid pace, leveraging on data and AI, pose a significant threat to legacy firms who are feeling constrained by their structures and operating models and is unable to innovate fast enough. Now, legacy and digital-first firms are inevitably colliding in every single industry. Now, today we have with us Srijay Ghosh and Karim Lakhani, who have been observing this from close quarters through both a practitioner and research lens. Now, just to share a little bit more about today's interviewees, Karim is a professor of business administration at the Harvard Business School. He's also the co-founder of several Harvard-wide research and education initiatives centered around the intersection of tech innovation, AI, and company strategy. Now, more recently, he's also the co-founder and chair of the Digital Data and Design, more commonly known as the D-Cube Institute at Harvard, as well as the founder and co-director of the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard. Now, as for Srijay, he's a managing director at Temasek and also the founding member of Temus. He's been driving Temasek's enterprise development initiatives and is the key architect in the conceptualization and the founding of Temus. He also led investments in Temasek in the areas of technology, media, and telco. Notably, in several Southeast Asia internet economy companies, which are household names today, we're talking about Lazada, Gojek, and Tokopedia over here. So we hope this podcast will help to catalyze business leaders to critically look at their business and operating models as they compete in the edge of digital and innovation. Well, great to have Srijay and Karim on board as we deep dive into today's topic. And we really want to get the ball rolling by looking at our first theme for today's discussion called Implementing the AI Factory. So first things first, Karim, help us understand what the AI Factory is all about. What do we mean when we talk about a digital operating architecture? Why is it disruptive? Why is it a threat to legacy firms?
Well, thank you first for having me here. It's great to be here in Singapore with you. I'm going to start with an example to sort of say what this AI Factory is and how this connects. I landed in Singapore and my hair was very unruly, so I wanted to get a haircut. I didn't have any Singapore cash. Thought I had my credit card, so I walked into Suntec Mall and went for a haircut. And then, I gave my credit card and they said, we don't take credit card, we only take cash or Grab Pay. I was like, oh, I just had the Grab app. And so within 30 seconds, I was just to connect my credit card to the Grab Pay app, press the QR code, and immediately within, seconds, the merchant got paid, the barbershop got paid.
Right.
And so what's happening in the background, right? There was no human intervention for me to basically talk to somebody at Grab and say, can you please authorize my credit card? There was no human intervention from them then calling American Express saying, is there, should we verify this card or not? And then the moment from me taking the QR code from my mobile phone to the merchant receiving the payment was fully automated. Right? And in many ways, our consumer lives are being enhanced by and run through AI factories in these large technology platforms. You look at Grab, you look at Gojek, you look at Tokopedia, you look at Google, Facebook, all these companies have already pushed themselves and all billions of consumers to have this automation in their lives. And the idea now is to say, what is at the core of this? At the core of this is a decision engine that basically enables decisions that many people make inside of companies to be fully automated, and that you drive inside an AI factory a set of predictions. So if I give you the example again, they had to make a prediction that Karim is real, right? And that he's the real person. Now they have my data on my mobile phone, right? I'm hitting them at the right time so they can make that prediction, right? Then my credit card company had to do the same prediction, right? And then talk to Grab and say, we're going to make this happen. So in all of these settings, predictions are being made at scale, pattern recognition is being done at scale, and processes are being automated. And so that's what the AI Factory does. The AI Factory is a way for us to industrialize and automate pretty much the activities inside of companies. In most organizations, the operating model runs by people. right? And what we're finding now is that in today's world of scale and technology and even consumer expectations, like I would not be happy if it took me 3 hours to get the credit card verified. And similarly, I was too lazy to walk to the ATM and put my card in and get the money out and do all that kind of stuff, right? And so the expectations of consumers is sort of instantaneous access to information, to data, and getting things done. But all the elements of prediction, process automation, pattern recognition, basically were done by Grab's AI Factory and American Express AI Factory. And I think that's what we're seeing happen, that we're industrializing these processes. Machines are running the processes, and humans are on the edge. Humans design the processes, humans code the machines, humans monitor the machines, but the process is fully automated. And that's what is at the core of what the AI Factory is. And what we're seeing is that this factory is now applicable to all types of businesses. Because if you sort of stay in the abstraction of predictions, pattern recognitions, and processes, then all companies have them. And then you can then start thinking about, like, how do I then apply technology to those problems instead of just human insights?
And well, the second question is to Srijay, talking about digital infrastructure. You have invested in digital-first companies, particularly within the Southeast Asia internet economy. As an investor and also as a shareholder, how do you look and assess these business models?
Thanks, Tian Tian. When we look at some of these digital companies, there are a few things we look at. First, of course, how is the business model aligned to the market attractiveness? And when you think about market attractiveness, you're looking at macro drivers. Take the example of e-commerce. You're looking at GDP growth, consumption growth, per capita consumption growth, so on and so forth. You're also looking at the digital infrastructure and penetration. Give you an example. In Indonesia, the internet penetration grew 5-fold in the last 7 to 8 years. And that has really caused why there's a lot of e-commerce and e-payments activity in the region. The third thing is also regulatory environment and how that catalyzes the attractiveness of the market. So that is the basic. How is the business model aligned to the market? The second, which I want to complement what Karim said, is how scalable is your business model? And that's where truly the analysis of the operating model come into play. And when you think about scalability, what we are trying to see is how much value you can create for every man-hour of effort spent. This must be exponential. If it is not exponential, it is not a scalable model, it is not a digital company. And a lot depends on how you harness data and AI to drive these business decisions. I'll give another example in the context of e-commerce. When you think about selection and recommendation engines, just the sheer volume of searches that go through these platforms, if a human was doing it, you can never scale it. It has to be run by an AI factory.
Yeah.
The third thing I would say is leadership, team, and culture. As we invest, we focus a lot on that clarity on focus and the mission. This is not just true for startups, but also for legacy companies who are looking to reinvent themselves and how they design the organization that can respond in speed and agility.
Right. So, Srijay, and this question to Karim, in fact, looking at the leadership team, looking at legacy companies that want to sort of reinvent themselves in this digital age, what would be your advice to them, especially business leaders and traditional enterprises, as they face disruption in the face of digital data and AI? How do you think they should go about architecting their businesses to be better prepared?
Yeah, so what's happening is that Srijay is creating all these companies or investing in these companies that are directly threatening these legacy companies in the first place. So it's very interesting. I'm going to put on my professor hat and give a little bit of a lecturing to the senior executives, right? Because I think many of them go to all these business forums, Bloomberg forum here in Singapore, or whatever is happening at Davos and so forth, and they get some AI magic, oh, we need to be AI. But their understanding is very surface level.
Yeah.
And what I find is in many legacy companies, the commitment is they're not serious about the commitment. And so the first bit in terms of getting ready for the gales of disruption that are coming, and they're coming faster and faster, is to be committed to saying that we're going to be in a transformation journey. And when we are in a transformation journey, what that means is that you're going to change. Transformation is about change. You can't hold on to your prior view of what your business model was and what your current operating model is. So we need, in most legacy large incumbents, a sea change in how we think about what boards are thinking about this, how boards think about technology, how boards think about business, and then also the senior leadership team. So first thing first, and again, this is going to be self-serving because I'm in this business, is that they have to learn. They've got to learn. Like, you have to go back and actually learn. Lots of us have written lots of things. There's lots of great material coming out of Southeast Asia. There's great examples of companies in Southeast Asia that have done this. And so the first bit is a learning mandate. But then the second bit is the change mandate, right? You've got to actually empower your organization to drive this change. And in the change side, there's also a learning story and a process change story as well. Because what we often see, what people think about when they think about digital, is that we'll just apply digital technologies to our old processes, right? But as I gave the example of GrabPay, right, that is a brand new process, right? A brand new way for them to approve people, to process payments, to do credit, and so forth. And while we as consumers, and they themselves as consumers, take that for granted, when they apply it to themselves, they don't want to change their own process because they felt like that's the way to do that.
Yes.
So I think process change is very important. And then, I just want to echo what Srijay said, is that the culture side is very important because part of this re-architecting the firm is your technology will change, but then your culture has to change and your organizational architecture also has to change. So it's a non-trivial set of activities, and it requires commitment by the C-suite all the way down and follow through, right? And that these journeys are multi-year journeys. It's not going to be instant. You can't just say, I'm going to have an AI office and the AI office will fix everything. That's not going to be the case. In fact, that's a recipe for disaster. Because what needs to happen is your entire data structure needs to be rethought through. But then as you redo your data structure, you actually now have to rechange your organization too, because oftentimes the data structures are in silos because of the way your organization is structured. And the examples, again, that Srijay has given and so forth, means you need data across your entire enterprise. So the advice is start at the top, invest in learning from across the entire organization, commit to the change, right? Enable your organization to change, invest in the technology, right? But the bigger portion is the organizational and culture change that lies ahead.
Right. So, Karim, we've spoken at length about getting firms to implement the AI factory. We've talked about process changes as well as some of the inertia there. But it's not just companies that need to transform, countries too. And so I want to move on to our second theme to look at how we can build up a pertinent use case for Singapore in this regard. So, staying with you, Karim, you are the co-founder and chair of the D-Cube Institute at Harvard. Could you tell us a little bit more about the mission of this institute?
Yeah. So the Digital Data and Design Institute, I blame this on my dean, Shrikant Datar. He's a friend and a mentor. And, we were thinking a lot about the digital age. He serves on several boards of companies, and he's sort of been seeing the transformation side in the large corporate American boards for a variety of companies. And what we talked about is the fact that for us as researchers and as academics teaching this to executives and to MBA students, that we have to be on the bleeding edge ourselves. We can't be any more fast historians. We have to be closely tied to the companies and try to understand what they're doing and how we, as the oldest corporation in the Western Hemisphere, Harvard is the oldest corporation in the Western Hemisphere, can in fact keep up with the times. Most organizations grow linearly. These digital companies in the age of AI are growing exponentially. So if we keep growing linearly in our understanding and our knowledge and what we accomplish, and everybody else is growing exponentially, then there'll be a big gap. So part of the reason why we even have like this nerdy D cubed digital data design. We don't say D3 because D3 implies linearity. D cubed implies exponential. So the engineer in me is coming through here. So the way we thought about this is that we need a brand new structure of doing research and dissemination of this research to the world. And so we sort of borrowed from our cousins down the river. We looked at the MIT Media Lab, which has had a great impact on the early internet. We looked at the Broad Institute, which is having a tremendous impact in the world of genomics. And what we saw is that they are problem-focused and they work closely with practice and try to solve problems while they do research simultaneously. So we have started off as of July of 2022 with 14 labs that are cutting across the span from trustworthy AI to customer intelligence to platforms to my lab on Laboratory for Innovation Science, where we really think that we want to partner with companies and help solve their problems while we do research. At the same time, we are working hard to disseminate this through a learning network and also create a foundry for new startups as well, a global foundry for startups as well. So the Institute our tagline is inventing the future. We want to invent the future of business with business leaders from around the world. We're creating a platform where it's not just Harvard Business School, but Harvard University, but also in the future other universities and other institutes working with us. And we want to collectively go figure out what this age of AI means for all of us. I think we're at the very beginning stages of this revolution. I think everybody's by now is sort of aware of what ChatGPT can do for you.
Yes,
it can do many things. Scary things is great. And so the pace of change is just super rapid. And we felt as an academic institution that we had to be designed in the same way to meet that challenge.
Well, to get ourselves ready or to get Singapore companies ready for that kind of pace of change, that rapid changes we are seeing in the industry, I want to pose this question to Srijay. You are the key architect in the conceptualization of Temus, which is founded to sort of help companies within Singapore digitalize and transform. You are its founding member as well. Help us understand what prompted the creation of Temus by Temasek and what does it stand for?
Temus was founded by Temasek to truly build a digital champion in Singapore. This is a part of Temasek's enterprise development initiatives to build future-forward companies in Singapore. Now, coming to the definition of digital champion, this was truly catalyzed by a pretty high demand of digital capabilities and talent in the region, not just by the rapid increase in digital spend in the region as internet penetration increases and they look at automating many functions, but also a shift to large-scale holistic transformation projects, which required looking not just at technology, but processes and people and change management. So Temus was founded to manifest this vision, and our mission statement is to unlock societal and economic value through holistic transformation enabled by technology. These are very closely chosen words because we think economic and societal value creation goes hand in hand. We think transformation has to be holistic and technology enables that transformation. So you asked the question, what does Temus stand for? It stands for being a big part of Singapore's Smart Nation aspirations, build digital capabilities anchored in Singapore, have a strong value orientation, not just shape the vision, but also deliver the vision and the desired outcomes. Invest in talent and skill development, and last but not the least, do purposeful and impactful work in Singapore.
Well, speaking of purposeful and impactful work, Karim, you are pretty active on this front as well. Could you speak about your work in open innovation and the impact on businesses? How can business leaders really encourage employee-led innovation, and how will companies then track the progress and success?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the reason I became an academic in the first place is in the 90s, I started to see the rise of open source software.
Yeah.
And this is like groups of people on the internet, collaborating to write software without any formal organization. And, there's a saying, and the same thing was true about Wikipedia, that it works in practice but not in theory, right? And so when I talked to my colleagues in academia who had studied software companies, very famous scholars, great mentors and teachers of mine, they said, this is BS. Like, this is never gonna, can I say that? I'm sure I can, right? Using acronyms. This is never gonna work. But in fact, it worked in practice, and what was missing was the theory. And the theory was that, in fact, you can motivate workers to go after projects collaboratively, right, to solve big problems if you just give them the space to do it, right, and the permission. And the reason why much of this happened outside of the corporate structures was because the workers could self-organize. They had the internet, they could find each other. At that time, the Facebook in the 1990s was called Usenet. You could find people on Usenet. I'm probably dating myself terribly this way, on Usenet, and then you could collaborate. And that was so interesting because it never made any economic sense. And part of my research is to explain why this exists and so forth. But more generally, what we see is that companies typically take a very small slice of the brain power of their workers, right? And companies face two problems. One is they often don't have diverse enough workers inside of their organizations, so that everybody starts to think the same way. And then secondly, they take a small slice of their brain power, right? Because you're assigned to a task, and that's what you're going to do, and that's all you're going to do, and so forth. The typical hierarchical organization that we're also used to seeing, including academia, including where we come from. And so what we saw with open innovation, with open source approach, was that if you let more diverse people in and you allow for self-selection, you allow for them to come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things and collaborate, massive innovation gets unlocked. And so this has been like the thing that I've been pursuing for a long time, and really trying to understand what enables these things and what are the barriers. And we've seen some great success stories. Again, like the entire internet infrastructure works on open source software. Much of all the AI magic that we're seeing today is all open source as well. And so that is driving massive innovation in our society. And unfortunately, most of it is sitting outside of the corporate structures because the managers come in and say, I know best what you should work on, and that's what you're going to do. Right? And so we're trying to re-educate our MBAs, to say, be more encouraging, don't just take a small slice of their brain, encourage a bigger slice of their brain, and let them bring their whole self, and let them actually self-select into tasks as much as you tell them what needs to happen as well. And so, many companies are getting the memo, many companies are trying to practice it, but I would sort of say we're just scratching the surface there as well in terms of how companies could, in fact, unlock that.
Now, I've heard this phrase come out quite a number of times. Companies are just using a small slice of that brain power.
Yeah.
And so talk about maximizing that. Srijay, what are your observations in the Singapore ecosystem in this regard? Are companies really juicing every bit of brain juice out of workers? Yet, how can we encourage more employee-led innovation?
A lot of it has to do with how you incentivize the employees and how you encourage that innovation to happen. And let me take a more macro view on this, because I think the government has a very important role to play here. If you think about the whole dream of a digital-first Singapore,
Right.
It is three pillars: the digital government, the digital economy, and the digital society. I think all three have to go hand in hand if we want to lay the foundations of us being at the forefront of being a smart nation. And to that extent, actually, the government has been pretty much in the front foot through various initiatives. You have the Tech Skill Accelerator Program, which IMDA is doing in collaboration with Skills Futures and WSG, again, encouraging employees to come out there and learn new skills and express themselves and expand, or rather, to your point, utilizing their brain more productively, learning new things, right? Not being siloed to the thing that they do today, but think about tomorrow. You have Enterprise Singapore looking at productivity solutions grants. IMDA is focusing on SMEs. I think SMEs is a big part of the Singapore economy. 70% of the economy is SMEs. And the Go Digital initiative, I think, is crucial, not just to look at employees sitting in large organizations, but also to look at employees who are sitting in SMEs, who also need that support and help. So I think a strong government push policy and support for innovation creates a strong catalyst for the entire ecosystem. And the private sector only reciprocates to these initiatives. And I'm pretty sure that some of these initiatives from the government will reap benefits, not just for the citizens, but the private sector and future companies that come to Singapore.
And I want to stay with you, Srijay, on this one. What do you think are the similarities in terms of the characteristics of a traditional enterprise and a government in terms of the way they operate and the challenges they face maybe comes to manpower as well?
I would say four things. There are similarities, yet some nuances, particularly in the first two. I would say the first one is value centricity and the second one is user centricity. So when you think about value centricity, typically a private enterprise would look at economic value creation and how it is derived. In the context of public sector, it is societal and thinking about the society at large. So how value is defined and measured is different. The stakeholders are different, but the objectives of value centricity is the same. Second is user centricity. When you think about private sector enterprises, it is a lot about the buyer, the seller, or whoever is your customer. Context of the government or public sector, you're talking about the citizen as being the ultimate user.
Yeah.
And when we think about transformation, when we think about anything digital where engagement and adoption is key to make it a success, the spirit of user centricity is a common thread that ties these two sectors, notwithstanding who the user is. So I think those are where the similarities, yet nuances, a little bit of nuance. But I think what is common, like you said, when it comes to manpower and when it comes to creating, reskilling digital talent, it's equally relevant for the public and private sector. And the second thing is when it comes to leadership and mindset, just like government, many legacy companies, like Karim mentioned, carries the same processes that has been there for years. But as you are moving into digital, as you're moving to the cloud, you need to relook at these processes to value realize, to maximize your value realization through digital, through cloud. And really that leadership, that mindset coming from the top is very important, and it doesn't matter if it is a public sector or the private sector.
So, Karim, any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I think Srijay's made some very good points here. Let me just sort of add like another lens on this as well. So if you sort of think about governments and businesses, they're all organizations, right? So in the end, we're running organizations. And organizations have people, they have processes, they have culture, they have software, right? And so part of what the only difference is that the government has a monopoly on their organizations, right? We don't have multiple governments versus the private sector has competition, right? And so monopoly in governments is good, right? Because you don't want chaos. But the issues and challenges are the same. The government executives are running organizations. They are running most government organizations need software. Now, their software might be terrible, but they still need software. Same thing with businesses. So the principles, that the Srijay outlined are actually pretty much the same across the board. And that's what's so interesting. Like we talked about the AI factory earlier. Well, governments will also need AI factories, right? It's not as if they're immune from predictions and processes, right? Or pattern recognition. Governments do that all the time. So we could start to sort of see, like the playbook looks to be the same, right? The playbook looks to be the same. And then that's actually good because then there can be cross-sector learning between what the enterprises have done and what the governments have done. Governments need apps. Guess what? Companies need apps, right? You need user centricity. You need good UX. You need to have design thinking on how you solve the problem. So the similarities are quite a bit. Yeah. Now, the value orientation is different. Like we think about social welfare, maximizing societal value, versus companies are thinking about economic profits and economic value. But beyond that, there's actually lots of similarities. And I think that's the exciting part that we sort of see today globally. It used to be the challenges were very different 50 years ago between what the government's trying to do and what the private sector is going to try to do. But if you take this organizational lens, then there's a lot of similarities. And those similarities are important for us to recognize and then learn from.
So we spoke at length about the similarities and differences between governments and companies and also how they can tap that manpower capabilities going forward. And I do want to move on to our third theme for today, which is growing a digital workforce. Because as Singapore, as companies transform, how do we actually build up a talent pool to capture those opportunities in the digital arena? I think that's a question on the top of minds of many business leaders, government leaders as well. So, Srijay, what are some of the opportunities that can be unlocked if the Singapore government looks at transformation, the way that CEOs look to change their companies?
First and foremost, leveraging the power of data and AI to drive better outcome for citizens. I think that should be, an opportunity or a learning that they can see how some digital-first companies, some private sector companies have transformed their business and operating models to accomplish that.
Do you think we can get the Singapore Parliament to take a course on AI and digital and all the parliamentarians?
I'm sure. I think there is merit to doing that, and maybe I'll bring that to life with an example, right? If you think about Netflix, Netflix used to send DVDs by mail, and that was their business. And then the second phase of Netflix transformation was to build a digital infrastructure to transmit that content digitally. The third phase of their transformation was to harness the power of data of their users to actually read the tastes of the users. What do they watch in the morning?
Yes.
What do they like watching after they have a dinner? What do they like watching on a Saturday night? And curating content for them. I recall talking to Netflix executives who said even before they go into a production, they can predict the success of that program. So I say this is because Netflix has reinvented their process multiple times over the last 15, 20 years, 20, 25 years. And why have they done it? Because they have never been afraid to reinvent. They've never been afraid to commit and be determined to part the old, to recreate. And I give you this example because if there is one learning, it is this, because governments are institutions that are formed on policies and principles that build over decades. But as we look forward to harness data and AI to better engage with citizens, we have to rethink some of them, and we shouldn't be shy from reinventing what was in legacy. There's a second point I want to mention, which is how do you leverage on partnerships to build competitive advantage? Again, Netflix wouldn't have succeeded without their partnership with Amazon to build that infrastructure. Uber wouldn't have succeeded without their partnership with Google on the Maps side. These partnerships were key for them to move fast. They figured out what they're good at and what they can partner. In the context of the public sector, continuing to expand on public-private partnerships that fosters innovation, helps the country to move fast and deliver the vision of smart nation is very critical. And if there is a second area, that is another area where how successful companies have leveraged on partnerships could be helpful for the public sector to look at.
So partnerships, one thing, but another point, another fundamental part of any transformation agenda is talent, and it's something that you have pushed for as well, Srijay. You are the chief architect in bringing the Step It Up program from US to Singapore. What has been the experience so far for you?
Yeah, the experience has been fascinating, and really this speaks to our purpose and mission of reskilling and building homegrown talent at Temus. As you know, Step It Up is a tech talent conversion program for people who have no digital skills and to make them coders, software developers, and programmers in Singapore. Globally, it has had very good results. It was launched in the US about a decade back and with some amazing success with Fortune 500 companies, very high conversion rates on people who were non-coders moved into these companies and became coders. We did the first run in Singapore. We launched it in November last year. Received about 800 applications, 22 were selected. The guys are actually in the office if you hang around. They're going to graduate in March and become full-time software developers in Temus. And over 90% of these trainees are mid-career switchers. They come from a variety of backgrounds. They come from some platform delivery. We have some platform delivery workers.
Yes.
We have chefs, we have private tutors, optometrists, offshore research engineers. It's fascinating to see the diversity. We are very encouraged by the success of our first cohort, and we immediately launched our second. Actually, the launch occasion was graced by the Minister for Communications and Information, Mrs. Josephine Teo, as our guest of honor, together with IMDA.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that for our second run, the interest levels and the applications are 25 to 30% higher than what we saw in our first run. So again, we are very excited. And we want to continue on this path of reskilling talent in Singapore.
And on the topic of reskilling and supporting workers through digital transformation, Karim, how might your research at DCube or DCube research into workplace transformation help other companies manage their changing organizational architecture to drive cultural change and also support workers in this aspect?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, let me just go back to what Srijay says. I thought his comment about using Netflix as an example is a really good one, and why I think the lessons from Netflix apply equally to the private sector as to the government sector. So what do you see there, right? One, you see this view that change is continuous. The change in your business model, the change in how you're going to run your company is continuous. Again, to go from being the largest mail user in the US to the largest user of the internet bandwidth, right? Almost overnight says a change, right? And then into personalization with AI, and now content creation, and now advertising, right? Like, massive change every 5 years, and so the change is continuous. And same thing is happening in our societies. Change is continuous, and our agencies, our government agencies need to get to that. The second is that they're continuously rebuilding their systems and their technology, right? They've gone through massive shifts in their technology over and over again. And the executives know that you have to keep rebuilding the systems as the context changes. And I don't think, company folks understand this in traditional organizations or government folks, but I think that's going to be part of that thing. The third thing is the need for talented people, right? So as you shift your business model, you also shift the types of talent you need. And so then how do you find those people? How do you train them? And for the government mandate, it's like if you invest in the continuous reskilling and retraining of their workers, it's going to both help the government sector, but also the private sector as well. So I think there's important lessons. And again, a program like Step It Up is a great initiative to really go out there and find workers. I think everybody complains about scarce workers, but I think there's like, well, invest in retraining. And like, this is not rocket science, right? Like, we can actually retrain. And the fact that you have from gig economy drivers to optometrists to research engineers all doing this tells you that, in fact, this is pretty exciting. And so what I would sort of say, our mandate is to actually figure out many of these questions. And that's part of the reason why I'm in the region, because we're thinking through research collaborations with several Singaporean-based companies and to have our labs work closely together. So for example, we have a digital reskilling lab, and the two principal investigators, the two professors there, are world-class thinkers and doers and scholars and thinking about how do you actually drive reskilling and how do you make sure that you don't leave swaths of the economy and workers behind. They're very much driven by the fact that businesses will have lots of demand, but we can't just abandon workers. We actually have to get them up to speed as well. And what are some effective ways to do that? That's one example. Similarly, our Trustworthy AI Lab is really focused in on, as more and more of our work is being driven by algorithms, how do we trust the algorithms? How do we know that they're doing what they're actually accomplishing? And similarly, we have a data science and AI operations lab, and their focus is to say, well, how will business operating models change when we actually have AI factories running at scale? So our hope is that our institute works with companies, hopefully here in Singapore and in the region, but globally, to identify folks that are the bleeding edge of these problems, and then we can work with them, apply our research prowess to their particular problems and help them solve those problems and also do research as well.
Right. So whether it is getting workers ready for the future and convincing companies and the government on the importance of building an AI factory to unlock those opportunities for the future that we've talked about, we all need actually a collective call to action to get things done and to get things going. And that is also our fourth and final theme for today. So I want to get your final thoughts, Srijay and Karim, whether it is companies or government, what needs to be done to bridge that gap when it comes to digital innovation? Maybe Srijay could start first.
Sure, I would say three things, keep it short. One, mindset to change and innovate with clarity across the firm. Technology is only part of the innovation. Process innovation is a critical step to reaping the benefits. And thirdly, company or government cannot transform without transforming its people. So upskilling should be core to any digital innovation agenda. Correct?
Yeah. What I would add is, look, we're not going to be in a world where there'll be less data, fewer algorithms, fewer connectivity, right? The trend line is more and more and more. And it's, again, not growing linearly. In many ways, it's growing exponentially. So we just have to accept that we have entered the age of AI probably about a decade ago, right? And we're here. And everybody's now waking up and saying, wow, there's all these crazy examples and so forth, from Midjourney and DALL-E to ChatGPT and so forth. And that's just the beginning, right, of its broad application to a whole range of things that happen in human life, in business, in government, both for the good and also for the bad. So I'll give you an example. Lots of the US democratic processes are based on comment periods from citizens. Now, I can have a bad actor using ChatGPT create beautifully crafted sentences arguing whatever things that they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So how will our government agencies react to that? What kind of policies are we going to put? Are we going to now ask for people to write by hand and send in postcards? Well, guess what? I can 3D print a nice handwriting as well from a company that's trying to be a bad actor. And so the point I want to make is that we've entered into this age, it's an exponential age, and that we all have to now say, now that we're here, what do we do? I think Srijay provided the 3 prescriptions. I'm not going to repeat that. What I would sort of say is that this is a leadership mandate, right? Our leaders, the business leaders that are listening to this podcast, the government leaders that are listening to this podcast, need to embrace this, right? Need to take this on as part of their mandate, their responsibility to transform their organizations. And that's, again, my professor hat on. Is like, often people say to me, like, oh, I get it, but it's so hard. I go, yes, but that's why you get paid the big bucks. It's hard, but that's why both our government leaders and our business leaders are being paid to figure those problems out, and they can't shy away from this. One final comment from me is that I'm really optimistic about this region. Again, having spent almost a week here now, meeting so many companies, it feels like there's a real sense of mission and a sense of Singapore can do this. And I often don't see that in other parts of the world. I think other parts of the world tend to be still very scared of it and want to sort of not be living in this future, right? And so my impression is that both from the folks we've met and that I've met, from state agencies and from the various businesses, Singapore-based businesses that are global in many ways, that in fact the willingness to embrace this is very high. So I'm very optimistic about Singapore potentially leading the way in the Smart Nation strategy and to deliver, right? I mean, we've been talking about Smart Nation for a while, right? And I think now you're at the precipice of delivery. I think COVID pushed us in this direction in a big way, and I really think that Singapore, probably of all the nations that I've sort of seen, potentially has the critical mass and the interesting government, private sector, citizen collaboration model that can actually make this happen.
Right. Any closing point? Any points to add, Karim? Srijay? Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Srijay and Karim. We've come to the end of our podcast. How do you become a digital company and compete in the age of digital, data, and AI?